Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Wylam here. In today's Q&A video, I want to answer the questions, do I color grade my videos for YouTube? It's a question that I get asked a lot in the comments and over email, so I figured I'd go ahead and address this in a video. So I'm going to answer two specific questions. Do I do auto white balance, because that kind of goes into color grading, and do I color grade my videos? I'm going to go ahead and answer the first one because it's going to be very quick, which is, do I use auto white balance? And the answer is yes. Auto white balance is great. It's definitely terrific, but there are a couple of things that you do want to know if you want to use auto white balance, because it's very quick for your workflow. If you are going to use auto white balance, the Fujifilm systems are great because they just have great colors right out of the camera. But if you trust the Fujifilm's auto white balance, you definitely want to use auto white balance lock. It's a feature in the switches and dials. And what you want to do is you want to set it to a custom function button so that when you press it, you can lock the auto white balance so that all of your recordings will have the same white balance. This is really important. This is also the reason why I harp on the X-T3's battery life, because I like to keep the camera on because I'm locking in that white balance that I'm using for the rest of the shots. So it's really important to have good battery life left over, or to plug it up to external power so you can keep the camera on and keep that auto white balance lock on. For my personal use on YouTube, I use auto white balance all of the time because I'm out and about and I just want to go ahead and capture a video very quickly. So I don't really want to go through the process of white balancing for a specific shot. I just go ahead and trust the camera, lock it, and then start recording, and it usually turns out really great. Now, the second part of the question is a little bit more in depth because there's a lot to it. And the question is, do I color grade my videos on YouTube? And the answer is 95% of the time it's no, because I don't really need to do it because the Fujifilm system just offers really great colors. That's the reason why I went with that system, and that's the reason why I talk about the Fujifilm system. What it does is it allows me to kind of skip an entire step in post, and I can just trust the color grading system, and it's been working out great for me. Now, if you're a professional, you're going to have to figure out your workflow and what you're trying to produce and whether or not you can do that. But for my use and for my YouTube videos, I definitely don't need to color grade. Now, having said that, there are three things that you really want to know if you're going to do that, because it definitely affects how your video looks. Now, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is white balance or color temperature, depending on how you look at it. Photographers usually call it white balance, and videographers usually call it color temperature. The reason why this is important and why you really need to think about this is that if you get the perfect white balance or color temperature, in other words, you hold up this perfectly white card and you get the perfect white so everything else is saturated correctly, what often happens is that the color is actually kind of bland, because real life, just like what it is right now in the middle of winter, is often bland. And what I most often say is that bland is something that nobody really wants. That's the reason why people color grade. So they get the perfect white balance or color temperature, and then they add a color grade on top of it to make it more than real life, to get a little bit more, full of life, a little bit more vibrance. Vibrance is probably not the right word for it, but you kind of get what I'm saying here. I don't really try to get that perfect white balance. What I try to do is I try to lean to one direction or the other, and that kind of makes the colors pop a little bit, because we all understand what real life looks like, okay? And most of the time, real life is pretty bland. We have to go to pretty exotic places to get those really vibrant colors, and that's the reason why we take vacations. But that's a different tangent right here. What I really think Fujifilm is really good at in terms of color grading out of camera is that when you get the perfect color temperature, it looks really good. But if you lean to either side, the color temperatures and the color grading in the Fujifilm system still looks really good. I don't think that's necessarily true for a lot of other camera manufacturers. I think when you actually start messing with white balance on the Canon side, it tends to turn a little bit red, which is always good because red is a good color to kind of, oversaturate on. I think for Sony, and what a lot of people are angry, not angry is not the right word, what a lot of people think is that it turns a little bit green when you don't get the perfect color temperature or white balance. And then there are other cinema cameras like Blackmagic. We actually use a lot of Blackmagic cameras in which when you actually fool with the color temperature, it actually still remains bland all the way through the adjustments, which is something that's really good for a cinema camera. What it essentially allows you to do is it allows you to play with the color temperature in the camera, but then you can still color grade on top of it because it's always going to be a little bit bland because that's what it's designed to do. I think what Fuji does really well is it allows you to play with that color temperature. You don't necessarily have to be perfect, but the color, especially in the skins and whatnot, still retains a really good color. And then when I start getting comments and emails about how did you color grade that, how did you do this, I know that I've kind of nailed that white balance and color temperature because it just shows up just good enough to where it kind of makes you think about it and it's more than real life. And that's what you're looking for when you're filming with the Fujifilm system and you don't want to color grade. You really have to play with that a little bit. So don't necessarily think there's only one correct white balance when you're out there filming with your Fujifilm systems. You really want to play with that and kind of find where your line is and what you want to do, and that would really help in making your picture pop out. Another thing that I would do, especially in the bright sunlight, right now it's not really all that bright, but I would look at using variable ND filters because there are two lenses making that variable ND filter work. It kind of acts as a polarizer and it can give it a unique effect. Now you have to be very careful with that, and most ND filters will have its own characteristics. That's kind of a suggestion, that's not really a rule of thumb, but if you do have ND filters, definitely try it out. So hopefully that wasn't a very boring way of covering white balance and color temperature, but let's go ahead and move on to number 2, which is the lighting. So if you're outside, you obviously can't control the lighting, but the good news is the sun is a great source of light and you can get some really great images from sunlight. So really no problems there. You can just play with it and figure out what you want from sunlight. Now, when you go indoors, it becomes very problematic because a lot of lighting from standard buildings just isn't very good. It doesn't live up to the standards that you want to record for video. So what I'm using right here, I have a light over here, and then I have a light right on top of me, giving me my hair light and also my shoulder light. I have them set to specific temperatures, and of course, I have a white balance that works with those two lights specifically. Now, let's go ahead and turn on just the regular lighting, and you can see a big difference. So I'll be right back. So right here, right now, I went ahead and I turned on the lights, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the lights right here. And what you can tell very quickly is that even though I haven't changed anything, with this light temperature difference, it really does affect the image quality, even though it's just really color temperature that's going on right here. When you're indoors, you really need to take care of your lighting situation, which means buying studio lighting. There's plenty of videos out there of people telling you which budget light will be great for your situation because there's just a ton to choose from right now. Now that we're on the subject of lighting, one of the things that you can do in 2020, and it is getting cheaper every day, is you can actually pick out some of these LED lights, and they are really cool nowadays. You can actually just get a remote like this, and then you can kind of just swap out different colors on each side, and it can really do all sorts of different things for your lighting scheme. So I would definitely recommend checking these out because you can get some really gnarly lighting settings around the back of your screen, just whatever you like, although you kind of have to be careful because you don't want to go too overly crazy with your lighting. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, and a lot of people put this as the first thing they talk about because it's gear related, which is the lens that you're going to use when you're recording your video. Obviously, that has a lot to do with how the image quality is going to turn out. But to be honest with you, most lenses in the modern era for video does pretty well. The only time that it actually struggles, it might be with the autofocus system, but within the Fujifilm's lineup, a lot of the lenses do really great. My personal favorite for indoor studio use, and I've said this plenty of times, is the 16mm right here. I can get really close to the camera and it gives me great background separation. One of the things that people talk about is I must have the aperture turned all the way down. I really don't. This is at f2.5. I like it right about there. I'm really close to the lens and it just gives me great separation, and also gives me the ability to actually work with the camera controls very easily. So definitely trying out a bunch of lenses and figuring out what you like is also really important. One of the things that I do want to tell you though is that the 16mm at f2.5 is really sharp. You definitely might want to adjust the contrast a little bit, and what I mean by that is actually adjusting it down. Having a super sharp image doesn't necessarily work well for video. A lot of people like a much more smoother, much more relaxed video image. I personally like to bleed the line just a little bit, but I don't want to bleed the line a whole lot. And it's not always the most expensive lenses that's going to make a great video lens. Personally, for me, the 18-55, the kit lens, I love using that outdoors with a polarizer. I love the imagery it gives me at f2.8, and it's a fairly affordable lens, especially if you buy it used. So definitely don't overlook some of the lenses just because they're not graded as a pro lens. Some of these lenses, even though they're a little bit cheaper, they can still make really great video lenses. So those are the 3 things that I wanted to talk about for color grading. Hopefully that helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, definitely leave it below. I'll do my best to read through them and then answer back. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.